Hello, everybody. Glad to have you joining us today. I'm Nathan Lee, the partner in charge of the Richie May Technology Solutions practice here at Richie May. And I'm happy to be joined by JT Gaietto, the leader of our cybersecurity practice here at the firm. So glad to have you, JT. Thanks for joining today.
Well, thanks, Nathan. Again, as we have our remote meeting sessions here in the brave new world that we're living in.
Yeah, I think now we're into, what is it, month 3, or maybe we're on our way well into month 4 of everybody working largely from home these days. And I know many of us are still working from home offices, and that presents some unique challenges, things that businesses need to be considering as significant portions of their workforce are working from home and working remotely. So we're going to talk about a few of those things today. It's good to have JT here joining us. So along those lines, JT, and what things do you think are likely to happen as a result of this new world that we're living in now, where people are largely working from home?
Companies are really starting to reflect on what this really means for them from an IT perspective. Some organizations are asking questions along the lines of should we be provisioning additional equipment to our employees, such as firewalls and router devices, all the way to the other end of the spectrum of folks asking about should we be using virtual desktops and not caring about the assets that folks have in home. And the answer really is somewhere in between, right? Forcing additional hardware devices out to everybody is actually problematic. While it does increase your security footprint, it actually also increases your overall services burden. And folks have to add yet another piece of equipment that they inventory, and administer from a care and feeding perspective. And so that's definitely not the recommendation. Common word on the street is this is going to be more of the normal going forward of having people outside of the office. And so really changing the paradigm on how we think from an issuing of device perspective is definitely a topic that many of the folks in the industry are talking about today.
Yeah, I think it's opened the eyes of a lot of business owners and business leaders to the opportunities that exist for companies to draw on more of a remote workforce, right? And find talent wherever they can find it. And it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out over the next several months. What things like that, JT, are you seeing sort of related to how internal IT departments are structured and staffed? Are you seeing any trends there that are already starting to emerge?
Yeah, I mean, that's really where I think, before we went into the COVID pandemic, right, I think you could throw a pebble and hit an article related to, staffing shortages in technology, salaries in technology industry going up. So therefore the costs for organizations were increasing. And contrary to, I think, what everybody's kind of thoughts were, as unfortunately unemployment increased, that these costs would go down. The availability of these skill sets is still in high demand. If you were already short-staffed to begin with, from an IT services perspective, that hasn't changed. If anything, your resources are even stretched thinner. On the flip side, the other trend that's a little bit more surprising is that companies are starting to realize that their employees are learning to self-help a little bit more. And so in some of those lower, and I want to say lower tier, but think of it as tier 1 and tier 2 level technical resources, the demands on those resources, again, in the beginning of the pandemic were significant because people needed passwords reset, they needed help getting on your VPN or whatever your remote workforce strategy was. But once we got into that level set mode, folks started, quite frankly, kind of self-troubleshooting, right? If they had a problem with their online collaboration meeting tool, regardless of what that tool was, they were figuring it out. And so now what trend we're starting to see come out of this, and again, these are more short term, right? Because we've only been doing this for about 4 months now. But those tier one and tier two tickets are actually decreasing, and we're starting to see clients ask questions along the lines of, well, do we need as much of that frontline IT staff? Should we be looking more at outsourcing? Not just for current situational cost reduction, right? But from a long-term perspective, because the full cost and IT burden from compensating some of these skilled resources, that hasn't changed, right? That cost hasn't come down, and so it's a really difficult decision on, well, we've got tier one and tier two resources not as utilized. We've got some of our more skilled resources that we were having a hard time find, spread even more thin. And we have a kind of questionable economic climate, 6 months from now. Do we really want to hire a high cost resource that is extremely hard to find only to let them go in 6 months, right? And so those are kind of the three different levers that are going on right now in businesses, or on the staffing front, where we're strategically outsourcing and or co-sourcing, if you will, with other skilled organizations, is starting to make a lot more sense.
So are you starting to already see some early indications that companies are doing that they're looking at either outsourcing or co-sourcing some of those functions?
The short answer to that is yes, but it's even, again, this whole pandemic has opened up a whole new world of possibilities for organizations, working with a distributed workforce. And so I think between the skill shortage that we had going into 2020 and the fact that customers are becoming more comfortable with folks being kind of external to that physical location, there's definitely more openness to considering those outsourcing and co-sourcing arrangements, because the service levels are again, contractually, kind of locked in from an SLA perspective. If you've got a good partner, the level of service is high. Typically what we're seeing, from a trend perspective, that those service levels are actually sometimes even higher than what they were getting before, because again, those resources being stretched thin, it enables the outsourced provider to, help the client prioritize requirements a little bit in a more clean fashion. So things are getting done in a more productive fashion, and it gives them the flexibility from a cost perspective, which I think, again, while for some folks and some organizations things are good, I think the CFOs in the room are looking at ways that, okay, if things do shift dramatically, rapidly, can we have a dial that we can easily turn up and turn down, for better or for worse, without having to go through massive reductions in force and things of that nature.
What things are important for CEOs and other business leaders to consider when thinking about that co-sourced or fully outsourced IT model?
A couple of the key points to focus on are any kind of contractual lock-in. Some of these organizations have very short terms, meaning, hey, with as short as 45 days notice, you can change the size and scope of the agreement. Whereas other organizations, it's a lock-in for 12 months. So that's the first part that I always encourage folks to pay attention to, is what does the contract lock-in look like? The second one is the auto-renew clause. A lot of organizations have had a bad taste in their mouth from an outsourcing and IT services perspective, because a lot of these organizations have these auto-renew clauses that say, hey, if you don't notify us in writing, 90 days ahead of time on the first full moon of the month, you can't cancel your contract. I mean, they're very, very obtuse requirements. And so, as things happen in a business, right, and you're working at the pace of the business, these dates and these milestones that you're supposed to pay attention to slip by, and the next thing you know, you're locked in for another term on the contract. And some of those contracts also have not just automatic renewals, but automatic fee increases that are baked in. And so that auto renewal clause is something to really focus on. And then the third part from a contract perspective that folks should really be looking at is SLAs, right? And that's their service level agreement. What are what are the terms and conditions of that agreement with the vendor, and making sure that you're getting the services that you expect to be getting for the price that you're paying. That is a very big portion of these outsourced agreements that a lot of folks tend to miss, right? And that's where you can either get degradation in service that you didn't expect, or the other piece too, and we've seen this in some contracts, is that as part of that service level agreement, if the customer wants this high level of service, they agree that they're going to replace the following pieces of their IT infrastructure, regardless if it's software or hardware, to be in compliant with our expectations within like 90 days. Outside of the contract side, the other piece that I really encourage folks to focus on is, look at the integrity of the individuals that are on the team. Some of these organizations will have either kind of pretty face or big name to the organization that comes in and sells the engagement, but only to be fulfilled by folks that aren't credentialed, or aren't really experienced in the industry or the service that's being provided. And so, if you want to think of it like a bait and switch type situation, really make sure that you're vetting the folks that will be on your team, who your account representative is going to be, and try to get that all formalized, as formalized as possible within that agreement, and get to know that company. There are plenty of companies out there with great credentials and great ethics that are willing to work with you. Those, and if they're not willing to work with you and they take a take it or leave it approach, that should be your first red flag right out of the gate.
Well, that's great information, JT, and it's always great to spend a few minutes with you and get some of your insights and thoughts based on what you're seeing with clients and issues that you see and trends that you're seeing out in the markets. So thanks for taking the time today. Thank you all for joining us today. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can do that below, and then follow us on LinkedIn as well. We always have lots of great information there and great content that should be valuable and beneficial to you as you run your businesses. So thank you all for joining us, and we'll catch you again soon.